Before I get into the main thing I want to do today, just wanted to point something out to you, and it's something that might be important in your case. In my case, it's not, because I believe that the shock mount is not really going to be used as a shock mount because of the rear suspension that I had bought for the coilover springs. It has its own shock mount, doesn't use this one. But this part is used because it mounts the spindle to the rod that's used to adjust the camber on the rear wheels, the strut rod. So I wanted to point out that this is a new shock mount that I bought, and the reason I bought it, if you've been following along all my videos, is because I had to beat on this one forever, and when I was done, these threads are a little messed up, so I bought a new one. But now I get the new one, and if you notice the profile of this one slants, this one's more vertical, and that was the first thing I noticed. But more important than that is if you look where this seat, where the shock would mount on this one, it appears to be further out than the strut rod mounting piece of it. On this one, if you look at it, the place where the shock is going to rest is actually either equal to this or maybe even a bit that way. This one is definitely a bit that way from it, and what that would do, it would make your alignment on your shocks. This is the right hand side, this is the left hand side. The alignment on the shocks would be a little bit off. Now, I don't know, maybe on the car you don't do anything performance wise, no autocrossing, no road racing, no drag racing, it might not make a bit of difference. On the other hand, if you are going to do those kind of things with your car, it's possible that could affect the handling at least a little bit. So I think I'm okay because, as I said, I'm getting a whole new trailing arm that's designed for coilover shocks, and that uses its own shock mount. So I won't be using the part of this that the shock normally goes on right here. I'll only be using the part that mounts the strut rod that controls the toe, or the camber of the rear wheels. So that is the rear spindle. I've got it set up in the vise. Let me turn it a little bit so you can see better the piece that it actually is. And the goal today is to set up the bearings that go in that. Should have brought that thing over here. When I took it apart, this was on the side where I had to beat it forever. When I took it apart, it looked to me like the bearing had been spinning on that shaft there. Right there, it's a little bit blued from the heat. So what I've done is I've bought a new stub axle And that requires me to take apart the spindle bearings and set them up. So the first thing I have to do is take this all apart and clean it out. And I bought tin bearings. And when I was looking at the seals that are in here, they didn't look anything like this. And on further examination, this is a cap that goes over where I would assume the bearing is. It's actually started to come loose, and I think I need a thicker bladed screwdriver to actually get in there and pry it now. But I have to work that up, get it off, so that I can get to the seal on the bearings. Surprised they didn't include that in the kit. So there, that came up a little bit. You just have to carefully work that, pry on it from all sides so it comes out kind of evenly. That'll help it free up. Now inside there does look more like a seal that came with the kit. That comes out very easily. This would be the inside of the bearing that I'm working on. The inside bearing. Bearing comes out very easily. Bearing itself doesn't look too bad, but I'm not sure about that inner part of it. I'm going to have to clean this all up in order to really see. I did not buy the seats. I don't think I need them, but we'll find that out as we progress. And if I need the seats, this might be a short video for today. Not even get posted because I won't have the rest of it to that also wasn't hard to get out. And now the bearing, that's the outer bearing. And I'm told these are pretty close in size, so you have to be careful that you get the correct one in the correct end of this. With those being out, I should be able to get the shim and the spacer out of there. Those came out very easily. Looks like the shim and one spacer. So I'm going to clean this up now, get all the grease out of there, and inspect those seats to make sure that I can proceed with doing the rest of the setup for today. I won't be able to totally finish this job because I'm still waiting on a lot of parts. I'm still waiting on my upper control arms. They supposedly shipped on Monday, but I haven't got a confirmation of that. and the whole rear end coil spring assembly, coilover I should say, spring assembly. And I bought a new differential with a different gear ratio. So kind of stuck until I get some parts. So we'll clean that up and I'll get back on and let you know how that went. Okay, I got all the grease out of there, and I wanted to show you what you need to do. My races look good. I'm trying to show you what you need to do should you need to replace them. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but we're going to try it. What there are, you can see it right there. There's two slots here where you can get a brass drift on them, one on each side, and knock it out with a hammer and then press it back in. And you basically flip the thing over, and once you got it flipped over, you can drive the other side out. So I wanted to, hopefully you can see this. You can see kind of burn marks, if you will, on the inside of that bearing where it was spinning on the shaft. So that confirms what I noticed on the shaft itself. And let me go get that and see if I can show you that too. Okay, this is the shaft that I first noticed. You notice that worn spot right in the center, right there. That's a sign that that was slipping inside the bearing. And I'll take it over and show you a shot of the bearing again, because I'm not sure I held it where you could see it the first time. There is a good close-up of the inside of the bearing right there. You can see that line there. That ought to be nice and smooth and clean. And while I got the camera near the race, I'll show you a shot of the race, and that's really how it should be. That's grease in there. But the race appears good, and if I'm wrong, I'll be doing this again. It'll be my own fault, but we're going to go with these races. See how that looked like it had a line in it, but you rub it and it's grease. So the next thing is to decide which, or how much I should say, shims you need. I'm trying to focus on the package that came with it. Oops. So there's the packet that how it came. You got two of these spacers. This is a whole supposedly complete car set, but since there's only one of each size of shim, I guess you have to make sure that you use appropriate size shims on each side that get you within the range. I believe the range is 1,000 to 8,000ths, and I have a setup tool that I'll get at next, and we'll start to decide which shims we need in this hub. So according to my Haynes repair manual, which I find to be a pretty good manual, I sometimes refer to it, they have pictures of most everything. Of course, there's some things they can't have pictures of because it's for 68 through 82. So, you know, they changed some things throughout the years. But according to this, I was correct. 1,000 to 8 thousandths is the play that's allowed in that rear wheel bearing. So here is the rear wheel bearing setup tool. Basically what it is these imitate your axle, okay, and they are ground just a little bit narrower than the axle stub is, so that the bearings can slip on and off, and you can take it apart again and again until you get the right setup. If you would try it putting it on the axle, you'd have it pressed on, you'd have to use a press to take it apart again. So basically this is a axle replacement for setup. So there's the setup tool set up in the vise, and I've got the inner wheel bearing on it. And it's kind of surprising. First of all, I did get new races with this kit. I'm struggling mentally on whether I want to replace them or not, but notice how easily this moves. Well, that's kind of deceptive, because whenever I went to put this thing on here, you have to get this lined up exactly right. You can't be off even a little bit or it binds. It's that close of a tolerance. So it took me a while to get that bearing on there. It took a little bit from the top too, but once it gets on it moves very easily. And I did put some oil on it to lubricate it. So as you can see, this is not an easy process to get this bearing to come down on the shaft. You would think once you did it once, you'd be able to do it again, but it's really a tight clearance and you can't be off at all. Once you get it lined up, it slips right on down. The next thing to do is put the shim on, or not the shim, but the spacer. Okay, very quickly, my battery's going dead on the camera. I put the spacer on. I'm starting with the thickest shim, and you'll see why later, but the thickest shim is the place to start. Well, I changed batteries in my camera, and I've got less minutes left in it than I have in the other. But anyways, after you put the shim on, and I decided I'm not going to replace these races because I don't appear to need it. And I don't have a race tool, so and again, this bearing's the same way. It's gonna, until you get it lined up exactly right, it's not gonna fall down on that shaft. Once you get it lined up exactly right, it'll go right in. Can't get it off. Can't get it on, can't get it off. There, it came off. There you go. Make sure that camera's still running. It says I have 1 minute left. So the thing now is to put the washer and the nut on it and just torque it down to 100 foot-pounds and then measure the play in the bearing. In the meantime, I'm going to plug in the battery charger and try to get a few minutes. Okay, got the nut on there. It's a 1/16. Got the torque wrench set to 100 foot-pound. And I got to tighten my vise down more because it's moving. That is not the best height for me to be trying to torque this, but I'm going to give it a go. I'm beginning to question this torque wrench. It tightened up at 100 and I couldn't turn this any further. It's supposed to go to 150. Not sure what's going on there. I have a beam type torque wrench that I'm going to try to put on there and see if I can get 100 on it. So I got out my old-fashioned beam style torque wrench and you read the value on this scale and the shaft of this thing just flexes until you get it up to the required amount. So that's what I'm going to have to deal with for now. And the next thing is to measure how much play there is in here. And I'm going to take a wild guess and just say that I might have to step down to the 0.139. But before I can do that, I have to set this up and measure the actual play and then do some arithmetic. So this is the setup for the dial indicator, and I will zoom in closer on this later, but that's pointing at 0 now. And if I lift up on this, that's going to give me the amount of play. And it came off of 0. This is what I hate about these things, that it's not so much the dial indicator, it's this setup for the magnetic base. Set it back to 0. So what I do is do multiple tests and make sure that as I'm testing it, it always falls into the range. So that's giving me anywhere between about, well, now it's, see, now it's, whoops, slipped off of the place I'm measuring. That's no good. See, this is why they're tricky. Okay, get it set to 0. Or thereabouts. And this thing does move a little bit, so I mean, it was almost impossible to get it on this part here. So I just went with a spot on the flange there, and it's not 100% smooth, so as it moves, you can see it's having variance in on its own, but it looks to be about 8 thousandths ish. That's 7. So I have a .145 shim in there now. The next shim down is .139 because you want to take up this slack. So that's 6/1000ths. So I'm going to take the 145 out of there, and I'm going to put, oh, I should have zoomed in on that to show it better. Let's do that again. But now that you've seen what I'm doing, you can watch the dial. That'll give you a better view of the dial, how it's moving as I lift up on that housing there. So it's sitting nicely at 0 now, and if I lift it straight up, it goes up to about 7 or 8 thousandths. So I'm going to take that out. Going to remove the 145 shim, put in the 139, and we should be around 2 thousandths, and that'll be really good. So I've got it set up again. I actually put the 139 in and found out that I had more play with the 139 in it after torquing it with the beam torque wrench. So maybe I had it too tight with the when I had the 145 in there, and I was using a defective torque wrench. So I have seen people do this on YouTube and not torque it, and based on that result right there, which gives me even on this race part here, that's not it's not totally even. Get back to where it's, we'll set it at 0 at a different point on the race, or not the race, but the, I guess it's a flange of the, okay, that's at 0. I was noticing there was difficulty reading it because of the light. I don't know if I'm blocking that light or not, but I raise it up, just over 1, back down to 0, just over 1. So I'd say that's pretty much a perfect setup right there. So this took 2 tries. With a good torque wrench, it probably would have only taken 1 because the calculations worked. Whenever I had a torque wrench that was more reliable. So my recommendation would be, if you're going to do this, have a good torque wrench. Don't try to do it without a torque wrench, because it would appear that over-tightening, and I would assume under-tightening, would affect that setup. I actually even saw a guy do this on YouTube. He didn't even use an indicator at all. He just went by feel. I initially thought that 127 was the one that I was going to need. And then I went and I said, no, it's going to be less than that. So that's when I guessed it was going to be the 133, I think. Anyways, it's on the video because I said it. So you're best off to have a dial indicator if you want it accurate, and you're best off torquing that. So this is all I'm going to do for today. I don't have the trailing arms that are supposed to come with the coilover suspension that I ordered. I don't know when it's coming in, but this will be the setup. I'll have to take that spindle out of there, put the bearings in, the spacer in, the shim in, and lube it all up, pack the wheel bearings, lube the inside, and then put the grease seals on and put it back together. So that's going to be it for today.